You think you're building something. You believe in the vision. You tell yourself you're working toward freedom, toward control, toward a life that belongs to you. But every time you get close, something stops you. You hesitate, you delay, you pull back, and you tell yourself it's timing, it's circumstances, it's the market, it's other people. But Carl Jung understood something you've been avoiding. The enemy isn't outside, it's inside, and it's not trying to stop you, it's trying to keep you safe. Safe from the version of yourself you're terrified to become. You're at work, you've done the job, you've delivered results. Someone above you takes credit, and you say nothing. You tell yourself it doesn't matter, that the work speaks for itself. But it doesn't, because silence without strategy is submission. You let someone else frame your value, and now you're invisible. You're in a relationship. You notice disrespect, small things, tone, timing, the way your boundaries are tested and ignored. You don't address it. You tell yourself you're being mature, that you're choosing your battles, but what you're really doing is training someone to see you as manageable. You're with friends. They make plans without asking you. They assume your availability, your compliance, your presence, and you show up anyway. You tell yourself loyalty matters, but loyalty without reciprocity is just fear of being alone. Here's what Carl Jung would tell you. You weren't built to fail, you were conditioned to stay small. Somewhere in your formation, you absorbed the belief that being good meant being useful, that being valued meant being accommodating. That success would come if you just worked harder, stayed humble, and didn't make waves. You were taught to serve the system, not command it. And now, every time you move toward real power, every time you step toward independence, authority, or dominance, something inside you recoils. Not because you can't handle it, because you were never permitted to want it. Jung called this the shadow, the part of you that holds everything you've been told not to be: aggressive, selfish, ruthless, cold, dominant. The qualities that make other people uncomfortable, the qualities that separate you from the herd. You spent your entire life suppressing that side, and now it's the only thing standing between you and the life you say you want. Because every time you're about to claim something, your shadow whispers that you don't deserve it, that you're not ready, that people will judge you, and you listen, you delay, you sabotage, and you stay exactly where you are. This script will show you 7 psychological mechanisms that keep you locked in place. Not theories, mechanisms, ways your mind has learned to protect you from the discomfort of power. If you're here for motivation, leave now. This isn't about feeling better. It's about seeing clearly. Most of you will hear this and do nothing. You'll nod along, feel the truth of it, and then return to the same patterns tomorrow. But a few of you will recognize the game, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Put your phone face down, let the noise drop, and if this hits you, write "I am the strategist" once in the comments, just to mark the day your mindset changed. You've been taught that explaining yourself is noble. If people misunderstand you, it's your responsibility to clarify. So when someone questions your decision, your boundary, your choice, you explain. You walk them through your reasoning. You justify. You defend. And the entire time, you think you're being reasonable. But here's what actually happened. You accepted their frame. They positioned themselves as the judge, and you stepped into the role of defendant. You handed them authority over your reality, and now you're seeking their approval to exist in your own decision. Jung understood that the psyche operates on power, not logic. When you explain, you're not educating someone. You're submitting to their evaluation. You're saying, "My choice is only valid if you understand it." But the moment you do that, your frame collapses. Because now your power is conditional. It depends on their comprehension, their agreement, and their comfort. And people who operate from positions of strength never explain themselves to those they don't respect. They state, they move, and they let others adjust. You see this in relationships constantly. Someone disrespects your boundary. You explain why the boundary exists, hoping they'll understand and comply. But explanation is permission to negotiate. You've just told them that your boundary isn't fixed. It's a position you're willing to defend, which means it can be challenged, and they will challenge it. Not because they're cruel, but because you've already shown them the boundary is soft. Compare that to someone who says, "This is how it is," and then stops talking. No defense, no justification, just reality. That person's frame is solid, yours is flexible, and in every interaction, the flexible frame bends to the solid one. Here's the shift. Stop explaining your decisions to people who didn't earn the right to question them. When someone asks why you did something and you don't respect their position, the answer is, because I did. When someone pushes on your boundary, you don't explain it. You restate it once and then you remove access. Not because you're being cold, because you understand that power doesn't justify itself, it simply is. And the moment you start defending your reality, you've already lost it. You've been conditioned to react. Someone criticizes you, someone dismisses you, someone disrespects you, and your instinct is to respond immediately, to correct them, to defend yourself, to prove them wrong. You think reaction is strength, but reaction is the proof of control, because the person who controls the trigger controls you, and every time you react, you're handing them that power. Jung spoke about the unconscious need for external validation. Most people don't even realize how much of their behavior is dictated by what others think, say, or imply. You're not responding to reality. You're responding to the threat of being misunderstood, underestimated, or dismissed. And that threat is so uncomfortable that you'll abandon your strategy to neutralize it. You'll break the silence. You'll explain. You'll engage. And the moment you do, you stepped into their frame. They set the terms. You reacted. They won. Watch this play out in any argument. Someone throws an accusation. It's not even accurate, but it's emotionally charged, and your instinct is to correct it immediately, to explain what really happened, to defend your character. But the moment you do, you've accepted the premise that their opinion matters. You've entered a courtroom where they're the judge, and you're the one on trial. Meanwhile, someone with a stronger frame hears the same accusation and does nothing. They don't deny, they don't defend, they just let it sit. And the accusation loses power because it was never acknowledged as valid in the first place. This is why silence is such a devastating tool. Not the silence of avoidance, the silence of refusal. When you refuse to react, you refuse the frame. You're saying without words, "This doesn't warrant my energy." And that refusal creates a vacuum. The other person expected resistance. They expected defense. They expected engagement. And when you give them nothing, they're forced to sit with their own accusation, their own emotions, their own need for validation. And most people can't handle that. They'll either escalate, which exposes them, or they'll retreat, which confirms your frame was stronger. Here's the shift. Train yourself to pause. When someone tries to provoke you, when someone criticizes, dismisses, or disrespects you, your first instinct will be to respond. Don't. Let the moment breathe. Let them finish. Let the silence hang. And then decide from a position of calm whether this person even deserves your words. Most of the time they don't. And your silence will communicate more than any defense ever could, because reaction is weakness. Response is power. And power doesn't rush. You believe accessibility is kindness. Being available, responsive, and present makes you valuable. So you answer every message. You show up to every event. You make time for everyone who asks. And you tell yourself this is what good people do. But here's what's actually happening. You've made yourself abundant. And abundance has no value. Because people don't treasure what's always available, they manage it. Jung talked about the principle of scarcity in the psyche. The things we can't access become more valuable. The things we have to earn carry weight. But the things that are always there, always available, always willing, become invisible. Not because people are cruel, but because human attention is competitive. It flows toward what's rare, what's difficult, what's uncertain. And if you're always there, you're none of those things. You're furniture, comfortable, expected, ignored. You see this in every dynamic. The friend who always says yes becomes the one people stop inviting intentionally. They're invited out of habit, out of obligation, but not out of desire. The person who's always available for advice becomes the one whose advice is never taken seriously, because if it's free and abundant, it can't be that valuable. Meanwhile, the person who's hard to reach, who doesn't always respond, who isn't always available, becomes the one people work to access, not because they're better, because they're scarce, and scarcity creates value. This isn't about playing games. This isn't about pretending to be busy or ignoring people to manipulate them. This is about understanding that your attention, your time, and your presence are finite resources. And when you give them freely to everyone, you're not being generous, you're being wasteful. Because you're training people to expect access without effort. You're teaching them that your time has no cost. And once that lesson is learned, it's almost impossible to reverse. Here's the shift. Stop being available by default. Start being intentional. When someone asks for your time, don't say yes right away. Pause. Consider whether this person has earned access. Consider whether this request aligns with your priorities. And if it doesn't, say no. Not with an excuse, not with an apology. Just no. I can't make that work. And then stop talking. You'll notice something immediately. The people who took you for granted will suddenly become more interested. The people who assume your presence will start valuing it, because you just introduced scarcity, and scarcity shifts the frame. You're no longer the one seeking connection. You're the one granting it, and that's an entirely different position of power. You think being agreeable makes you likable. You believe going along, nodding, accommodating, and not making waves will earn you respect. So when someone suggests something you disagree with, you stay quiet. When someone makes a decision you don't support, you comply. When someone steps on your boundary, you let it slide. And you tell yourself you're being easygoing, but what you're actually doing is erasing yourself. Because every time you agree when you don't, every time you comply when you shouldn't, you're training people to see you as someone without a position, someone without standards, someone who can be shaped. Jung understood that the psyche needs opposition to define itself. You don't know who you are until you know what you stand against. And if you never oppose anything, never push back, never create friction, you become formless. You become a reflection of everyone else's preferences. And people don't respect reflections. They tolerate them, but they don't value them. Because value comes from differentiation. And differentiation requires edges, and edges require conflict. Watch what happens when you never disagree. People stop asking your opinion. Not because they don't like you, but because they've learned your opinion doesn't exist. You'll agree with whatever's easier. You'll go along with the group. You'll defer to whoever speaks with more confidence. And once that's established, you're no longer part of the decision-making process. You're part of the execution. You're the person who gets told what's happening, not the person who shapes it. And that's not collaboration. That's management. Now compare that to someone who disagrees, not aggressively, not emotionally, just clearly. Someone who says, I don't see it that way, then explains their position without apologizing. That person immediately becomes more interesting, more respected, more valued. Not because they're disagreeable, but because they have a frame, they have a position. And when you have a position, people have to take you into account. They can't just assume your compliance. They have to negotiate. And negotiation is proof of respect. Here's the shift. Start saying no to things you disagree with. Start voicing your position, even when it's uncomfortable or creates tension. Even when people push back, because that tension is the price of being taken seriously. If you never create friction, you'll never create respect. And if you're afraid of conflict, you'll spend your entire life shaped by people who aren't. Stop seeking harmony. Start seeking clarity. And clarity requires opposition. You don't have to be combative, but you do have to be clear. And clear people are never invisible. You've been taught that your worth comes from what you do for others. That value is measured by usefulness. So you help, you contribute, you support, you solve problems, you make yourself indispensable. And you believe that once people see how much you give, they'll value you. But here's what actually happens. They start expecting it. And expectation kills gratitude. Once your effort becomes the norm, it's no longer seen as a gift. It's seen as your role, and roles don't get appreciation. They get managed. Jung discussed the dangers of over-identification with the persona, the mask you wear to be accepted. If you define yourself entirely by what you do for others, you stop existing as a separate entity. You become a function, and functions are replaceable. You see this everywhere: the person who always picks up the slack at work, the person who always plans, the person who always gives advice, solves problems, and makes things easier. At first, people appreciate it, but over time it becomes expected, and once it's expected, it's invisible. You're not valued. You're utilized. Here's the shift. Stop giving by default. Stop making yourself useful to people who haven't earned it. Stop solving problems for people who don't respect the solution. Start withholding, not out of spite, out of strategy. Because when you stop being constantly available, constantly helpful, continually accommodating, people are forced to notice the gap. They're forced to recognize that what you were doing wasn't automatic. It was a choice. And choices can be withdrawn. That withdrawal creates discomfort, and discomfort creates value. Suddenly, your presence matters, your effort matters, because it's no longer guaranteed. You see this in relationships all the time. One person gives constantly, the other takes it continually, and the giver believes that if they give enough, the taker will eventually reciprocate. But that's not how it works. Because the taker has learned that sharing is just what the giver does, it's not special, it's not valued, it's expected. And the moment the giver stops, the taker no longer feels grateful. They feel confused, they feel inconvenienced. Because the dynamic was never about appreciation, it was about supply. Here's the reality. People don't value what they didn't have to work for. If you give freely and consistently, without requiring anything in return, you're not building a connection. You're building dependency. And dependency doesn't create respect. It creates entitlement. So stop giving to people who don't give back. Stop helping people who don't help themselves. Stop being helpful to people who see you as a tool. Let them struggle. Let them feel the absence. Then watch how quickly the ones who actually value you will adjust. The ones who don't won't even notice. And that tells you everything you need to know. You think being humble is virtuous. You've been told not to brag, not to show off, not to make others uncomfortable with your success. So when you achieve something, you downplay it. When someone compliments you, you deflect. When you're in a room of people, you make yourself smaller so others feel bigger. And you tell yourself, this is maturity. But what you're actually doing is erasing your presence. Because humility without power is just invisibility, and invisible people don't lead, they follow. Jung understood that the psyche needs acknowledgement to solidify identity. If you never claim your victories, if you never own your value, if you never let others see your competence, you're not being humble, you're being forgettable. Because people remember presence, not absence. They remember the person who owns the room, not the person who shrinks in the corner. And if you're constantly shrinking, you're training people to overlook you. Not because you're not capable, but because you've made capability invisible. This doesn't mean you become arrogant. It means you stop apologizing for being competent. When you do something well, you acknowledge it. When someone compliments you, you accept it. Thank you. Not, oh, it was nothing. Not, I just got lucky. Not, anyone could have done it. Because every time you deflect a compliment, you're telling people not to see you. You're saying, don't acknowledge my value. And they won't. They'll move on to someone willing to be seen. Here's the shift. Start owning your position. When you're good at something, say it. When you've achieved something, claim it. When you're in a room and you know more than the people around you, don't hide it. Present it, not aggressively, not desperately, just clearly. Because clarity is power, and people follow clarity. They don't follow uncertainty. If you're always unsure, always modest, always deferring, you're not being respectful, you're being weak. And weak people don't shape outcomes, they accept them. You being conditioned to fear rejection, to avoid disapproval, to make sure everyone likes you, or at least doesn't dislike you. So you soften your edges, you agree when you don't, you laugh at jokes that aren't funny, you tolerate behavior you don't respect, and you tell yourself this is social intelligence. But what you're actually doing is trading power for comfort, because every time you adjust yourself to make someone else comfortable, you're communicating that their comfort matters more than your authenticity. And once that's expressed, you're no longer operating from your frame, you're operating from theirs. Jung warned about the dangers of living entirely through the persona, the socially acceptable mask. If you spend your entire life performing for others, adjusting, accommodating, shaping yourself to fit their expectations, you lose access to your authentic self. And without access to your authentic self, you have no center, no anchor. You become a collection of reactions to other people's preferences, and that's not a strength, that's slavery. Here's the mechanism. Every time you prioritize someone else's comfort over your truth, you weaken your frame. You teach yourself that your reality is negotiable, and once your reality becomes negotiable, you have no foundation. You'll shift with every interaction. You'll be one person with this group, another person with that group, a different person depending on who's watching. And that constant shifting is exhausting. But more than that, it's transparent. People can feel when you're performing. They can sense when you're adjusting. And it doesn't make them like you. It makes them distrust you, because they know they're not seeing the real version. They're seeing the version you think they want. And that version has no power. Here's the shift. Stop performing. Stop adjusting. Stop softening yourself to make others comfortable. Be the same person in every room. Say what you mean what you say, and let people react however they're going to react. Some will respect it, some won't, and that's the filter. Because the people who can't handle your authenticity are the people you don't want in your life anyway. They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting someone who won't be controlled. And that's precisely the separation you need. Now let's be clear about what happens if you ignore this. Suppose you keep explaining yourself to people who don't respect you. Suppose you keep reacting to every provocation. Suppose you stay available, agreeable, and accommodating to everyone, even when you keep giving without expecting reciprocity, if you remain humble to the point of invisibility. Suppose you keep performing for approval. You don't just stay where you are, you become a tool, a resource. Some people use it when they need something and forget when they don't. You'll be invited to things out of obligation, not desire. You'll be consulted when convenient, not when it matters. You'll be tolerated, not valued. And you'll tell yourself it's fine. Those relationships take time. That success takes patience. But the truth is more straightforward. You've been trained to accept a position of weakness, and now you're living in it. Carl Jung understood that the shadow doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It grows. Every quality you suppress, every instinct you deny, every edge you soften, it all accumulates in the unconscious, and eventually it erupts. Not in a way you can control, in a way that controls you. You'll sabotage the relationship. You'll destroy the opportunity. You'll burn the bridge. And you'll tell yourself you don't know why, but you do know. You spent years suppressing the part of you that refuses to be managed. And when it finally breaks through, it's not strategic, it's destructive. Because you never learned to integrate it. You only learned to suppress it. Integration means bringing the shadow into the light. It means acknowledging that you have a dominant side, a ruthless side, a side that doesn't care about approval, doesn't care about comfort, doesn't care about being liked. And instead of suppressing that side, you learn to use it. Not all the time, not recklessly, but strategically. You know when to be warm and when to be cold, when to engage and when to withdraw, when to give and when to withhold. And that calibration, that ability to move between modes depending on the situation, that's power. Because you're no longer at the mercy of one setting. You're not permanently agreeable. You're not permanently cold. You're adaptive. And adaptive people control outcomes. Here's what that looks like in practice. Someone disrespects you. Old version of you explains, defends, reacts. New version pauses, decides if this person matters. If they do, you address it once, clearly, without emotion. If they don't, you remove access and move on. No explanation, no drama, just distance. Someone tries to pull you into their frame. Old version complies, engages, justifies. The new version refuses the premise, doesn't argue, doesn't defend, just restates your position and stops talking. Someone expects your time, your energy, your help. The old version gives it automatically. New version evaluates. If they've earned it, you give. If they haven't, you don't. And you don't apologize for the boundary. This is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole, not by rejecting parts of yourself, but by integrating them. And once you integrate the shadow, once you stop running from the parts of yourself that make others uncomfortable, you stop sabotaging yourself. Because you're no longer afraid of your own power. You're no longer fearful of being too much, too cold, too dominant, too separate. You understand that those qualities aren't flaws, they're tools, and tools are only dangerous when you don't know how to use them. So here's the challenge. Go back through your last week. Identify one moment where you explained yourself to someone who didn't deserve it. One moment where you reacted when you should have stayed silent. One moment where you said yes when you meant no. And next time that moment comes, do the opposite. Don't explain, don't react, don't comply. Just hold your frame, let the discomfort sit, let the silence stretch, and watch what happens. Most people will adjust. Some will push back. And the ones who go back are showing you exactly who they are. They're showing you they've never been interested in respecting you. They were interested in managing you. And now that you're unmanageable, they're uncomfortable. Let them be. If this hits you, write, "I am the strategist," once in the comments, just to mark the day your mindset changed. Share this with someone who's been stuck in the same loop, explaining themselves to people who don't listen. And subscribe, because there's more coming. Not motivation, just clarity, the kind of clarity that separates you from everyone still playing the old game. You're not like them anymore. You see the structure now, you see the frame, and once you see it, you can't go back. You either step into it, or you stay managed. The choice was always yours. You didn't know you were allowed to make it. Now you do.